Let's face it, cyber attackers have the advantage. ExtraHop is on a mission to help you take it back. Regain the upper hand with security that can't be undermined, outsmarted, or compromised. When you don't have to choose between protecting your business and moving it forward, that's security uncompromised. See how it works in the full product demo, free online at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Wide-scale adoption of cloud applications, an increase in remote workers, and expansion of branch offices has rendered the centralized, on-premises security model impractical. Enter Cisco Umbrella. Umbrella now includes secure web gateway, firewall, and cloud access security broker functionality, plus integration with Cisco SD-WAN, all delivered from a single cloud security service. It helps businesses of all sizes secure their network and extend protection to roaming users and branch offices. Security doesn't have to be complicated. Get simple, smart, and powerful security with Cisco Umbrella. Visit securityweekly.com/Cisco Umbrella to learn more. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're available on demand for your viewing pleasure at, ironically enough, securityweekly.com/on demand. Now on to the Enterprise Security News. Lots of fun stuff going on this week. I did want to talk about, kind of segueing off from our previous conversation, which we mentioned some of the stuff that I want to talk about in here, is Awake Security, who then I remembered was acquired by Arista Networks, had a nice write-up of exploiting CVE 2018, ironically enough, 13379 is the CVE number, is
nice.
Remote code execution vulnerability. I don't know if it's remote code directory traversal, at least, unauthenticated in FortiGate appliance. And it's first of all, it's a great write-up about what happened. And essentially, the Cliff Notes version is they exploited this vulnerability. Credentials were stored in clear text for domain users, and then they pivoted from there using RDP, and then the UPS exec with Cobalt Strike, like we were kind of mentioning. I was using that as an example because it was a story in our news cycle this week. So successfully authenticated user credentials were saved in plain text to a file that you could access via the directory traversal vulnerability. Any unauthenticated visitor could exploit the vulnerability to retrieve this file and collect plain text credentials. That was the start. So why can't we just
ridiculous?
Why can't we just patch this? I mean, we've talked about how difficult it is to have a patch cycle and a window for maintenance on your VPN devices when everyone's working from home. I get that. That was true before the pandemic hit. I remember doing that, back at the university days as well. And it can be hard, but also the CVE did say 2018. So this was even before the pandemic as well, before everyone was working from home. And it's still not.
Yeah.
Like, why?
Well,
We know why, because we've all been there and we know why. And most of us listening, we know why.
This is incredibly common. Like I don't know how many security products out there are still doing this, but we were on a pen test and just randomly found another security product. Mm-hmm. We were able to get in with default credentials, and the security product had a connector to AD. And when you put in the actual account details for that, every time you went to the edit page for that, it was loading the password in plain text into the HTML. You just had to right click and say view source. Mm-hmm. And the password was so clearly the password was being saved in clear text on the back end there somewhere as well.
Right.
And
I mean, default credentials are one thing. They're tougher to discover, although even in my testing with the free and open source OpenVAS with the free community plugin feed, they have a commercial feed that you can pay for that includes enterprise level products in the paid version. But even in the free version, it was finding default credentials. And this is in a scanner I can stand up for free. I would imagine, Adrian, how your testing went on the commercial side of vulnerability scanners, they should be able to discover some default credentials. I mean, a lot of them do in my experience as well. But also I think they should find directory traversal bug that was in there. If you're doing some kind of network-based scan, or I mean, are you doing an application scan against the web management interface of your appliances? Maybe not. So my question was like, did you even know this vulnerability existed? Someone had, maybe. It all depends.
Yeah. I'm actually an advisor on a board of a company that makes a small tool that does nothing but look for default credentials. It's called IoT Crusher, and there's a lot missing from the vulnerability scanners.
Still,
there's a lot of
I always
stuff
knew I recognized there was a gap. I was very vocal about that when I was at Tenable. Renault probably remembers me being very vocal about that.
They're all big enough to hire one person and say, just gather all the default credentials, and put together plugin checks for default credentials on all these things.
Right.
Because so basically all this tool needs to have is like an SSH module, an HTTP module, and maybe an FTP module. But most of the default credential situations you're going to find are you're going to authenticate over one of those three. And then you just need a library of them.
Right.
So it's really like a single plugin just with, a database of usernames and passwords to check.
So crazy. Godly.
So I'm looking at it going, why didn't they apply the FortiGate update in this case? Mm-hmm. And I keep thinking, we've got now with our Windows systems, we get cumulative updates. We can pretty much get the easy button for keeping those fairly secure. Well, actually, most of the general purpose OS systems, it's pretty easy. Is it just too hard to keep the perimeter devices secured on a practical basis? Do people not want to risk outing their VPN while it boots to apply a patch, or they don't have a spare to do regression testing? That's the thing that's stuck in my brain.
Yeah, what do they need? What do the admins need to? Because whatever they need, I'm gonna help them get it. In terms of because I also want to have a policy. If I were writing the security policy, really for any company, I would write in a window that when a vulnerability exists, you have X amount of time to fix it. And sure, we can have a conversation if you're going to slip past that window, but there has to be some guardrails in place for applying these patches. And, I've done the same thing recently with security policies. I'm like, this particular part of the policy does not put any guardrails around it. Basically means someone could have a vulnerability in a system and it could be there forever, and the policy is not ever going to call that out, which means you never put processes and solutions in place to enforce those guardrails. That's a huge gap in your security program. It's almost like step one in vulnerability management is creating that policy and then figuring out a way to enforce it. And obviously that wasn't the case in this company. I'm not faulting whoever this company was in running it, right? I want to talk about what the solutions are. If you have a security policy and you're paying attention to it and implementing against it, this type of situation really shouldn't exist. I mean, of course, there's always extraneous circumstances, but...
So coming off our testing, I think there's two sides to this. And Lee pointed out the most obvious, if you own a bunch of Fortinet stuff, you should have a pipeline that notifies you of new patches that need to be applied and to what devices. And, there should be a process for that. For in most organizations for the main OSs, that process is very clear. The tools to implement that process are very clear. But once you get into network infrastructure and IoT devices and stuff, it starts getting murky. In some cases, like IoT devices, like where do I even? You have to hunt to find the page that tells you about new firmware.
Right.
They're not even actively letting you know that they've published new stuff. But then on the flip side of that, the vulnerability scanner is supposed to save your bacon and say, hey, you don't have a patching process because this thing is missing a whole bunch of patches. But what I found there in the testing is that for a lot of network infrastructure and IoT devices, like the network infrastructure in my place is Linux based. And when every major vulnerability scanner hits it, it tells me it's a Debian server. And it's very much not. And it's because, those companies haven't done the work to catalog network infrastructure, IoT devices, and be able to tell, done the library mapping of here's the current version we're seeing, and here's what vulnerabilities exist on it because it's missing.
Adrian, it's one reason why, it's actually one of the reasons why I joined Tenable looking at their technology stack at the time, several years ago. But they had what they I don't know what they call it now, but it used to be called the passive vulnerability scanner.
Yeah.
Right? And it would sit on the network, and it told me, I remember my example I used to use in presentations was I had a TiVo device that I didn't know ran Flash, but it ran Flash, and it somehow, the passive vulnerability scanner discovered that over the network. And I think it was the same thing like my treadmill. It would find that weird stuff. And even if those individual vulnerabilities weren't necessarily the issue, it's a good indication that the firmware is likely out of date in those devices. And Tenable has patents, a patent or multiple patents on that technology. And I always loved it as that catch-all, right, of telling me about stuff that's not up to date in my environment. At least if I know about it, I can put a plan together. That doesn't mean I'm going to drop everything and go fix all my IoT devices, every day, but I should have a plan for that.
But now there's thousands of IoT vendors. Everything's running Linux, and what you get back in these scans is, Linux 2.6.
Yeah, active scans. It's harder over the network to do that stuff, which is why I liked passively doing that.
And it's called Nessus Network Monitored now is the new name for it.
Great product. So some of the other things, so with remote desktop protocol, so you're able to just reuse those credentials and use RDP to log into other systems. Now, granted, your monitoring of security and systems maybe should flag on that, but also shouldn't you have two-factor, some kind of multi-factor when people log in? I mean, we're also BeyondTrust is in here as well. That's a conglomeration. Remember BombGuard and all those companies and other companies make the similar products that basically proxy the authentication, use temporary credentials. So when you're RDPing in, you can't just reuse credentials. Like there's a separate process when admins have to go log in. That seemed super important too in this case.
Right.
I mean, it's this write-up is every pen test ever. And when we read about ransomware crews and look at their techniques, it's every pen test ever.
Yep.
Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, we trained for this.
It's got to come back to the visibility that we were talking about a minute ago, that there's not enough awareness of where the holes are. And so you can't easily go back and make sure that, we've got the latest version, let alone how does your scanner check to make sure you got to a FAON? Well, you can't. You have to have some sort of process where you're validating that, and then it doesn't get turned off, or that, the VIPs don't have special treatment. I've actually found sometimes there's a perception that the VIPs want special treatment, but then more of them than not say, no, actually, I want to be treated like everybody else. It's just people think they can't ask them to do something harder or more difficult because they're a VIP.
Well, and as we know, a lot of the exceptions could be us security people and or other IT people that have the exception. No.
and I mean, that's a culture change, So I mean, two things there, Lee. One is in most of the scanners do configuration checks. So making sure two factors there should be a thing it can do in at least some of the infrastructure. But I don't know if it can query Okta or something like that, like an SSO vendor, an IAM vendor, but certainly on some of it can, and then the other piece there is just a cultural change. Like none of this should have been a surprise. These are all, I mean, lack of visibility aside, these are pretty basic security program maturity things. I mean, everything in here falls under basics.
Well, and I think
what we usually talk about is basics.
The why is my story number 9. At least one of the reasons that I thought that Coalfire so very eloquently put psychological inertia. They're talking about inertia, disrupting inertia in your cybersecurity strategy. And I love this quote: "Psychological inertia, as it's known in medical literature, is prevalent in workplace change management because committing to the changes necessary to achieve higher level objectives causes individuals to feel anxiety and fear." I think
people resist change.
Right? I mean, this could be summed up as people don't like change. Going back to my The other quote from the first job I worked at, right? Embrace change was the CEO's mantra, preying exactly on what Coalfire has written in this article, right? You got to get people adaptable to change. Now, when they talk about the solution to this, they say, in fact, most wildly successful organizations can point to one or more significant disruptions that served as the catalyst to overcome status quo, bias, and drive innovation. That basically means, like, we got hacked, so we're paying attention to security now, right? So embrace change and hopefully simulate that significant event that's going to adapt people to change.
And, I don't want to throw CISOs under the bus, but I feel like this is first and foremost the biggest job of the CISO is to be able to sell this to the organization.
Yep.
And to get their peers, the CTOs, the CIOs, everybody in the executive tier to say, yeah, security is important. We're not only going to support the changes you're making, but we're going to push for it. And in 100% of the cases that I've personally been in and heard of where you don't have that support higher up, it doesn't matter what the rest of the...
You could have everyone read Who Moved My Cheese. Great book, real easy read, right? But if you still don't have buy-in from the top, it's not going to resonate.
Yeah.
Right. But you also need that pivotal impetus to get the ball rolling. I mean, I had a friend telling me about he got huge traction on a system that monitors all kinds of inputs on their IT devices, and there's notifications if your devices aren't up to snuff, ultimately winding up in a black hole route if it's really bad, which makes patching difficult. There's an exception process. And then it's like, well, how'd you get started? Well, it turns out they had an incident and their regulator came down on them, and it's like, well, damn, that's a pretty nuclear card to have to play. I would love it to be a little easier than that. But now it's 15 years later, let's say, and they've actually got a lot of both. They've got across the board buy-in on the process. It's wonderful now. I'd call it best of breed. Sorry for the cliche, but how do you get that ball rolling? I'd hate to have everybody wind up with a severe incident to start things off.
Right.
Breaches are pretty effective at getting the ball rolling. Me and my pen tester buddy, I think most people who've done pen testing for any length of time have joked about starting a breach as a service offering, because it just feels like you can't. At least back then, 9 out of 10 companies, you just couldn't budge. I hope that's less now.
We hope. Apparently, there was a mix-up in the timelines. Multiverses got crossed, and a story from years ago made it into our... Yes. LastPass is owned by LogMe, and we knew that. Somehow that... Yep. I don't know what happened.
Somehow there was a new news story on a 6-year-old acquisition.
Something with a variant somewhere. BeyondTrust has... and it's interesting when we talk about basically some of the aspects of identity management, right, is what we're talking about. Really also privileged access management when an administrator needs to access a system. BeyondTrust has a great solution for that, and there's many to choose from. And they had a new release in... they had two things. One was a report that said removal of admin rights and implementation of pragmatic application control were most effective at preventing malware.
Are you sure that's not also from 2015 or maybe 2005?
Could be. Still true today, though. Still true today.
Yes, very much.
Yep. No, this one was recent, as far as I know. And then they also had a new release of their privileged remote access control that enables organizations to properly manage and inject credentials managed by Azure AD domain services, and they can leverage the secure remote access vault to rotate account credentials. That's some of what we're talking about when we're talking about RDP and how to maintain and control access to systems. I think this puts you in a much better place, and as far as I know, would prevent, I think it would prevent, depending how it's configured, could prevent that. I leaked some credentials somewhere, but getting remote access to my systems is much harder because I had these other controls and solutions in place. And again, BeyondTrust is just one vendor in that vertical that I'm sure we'll test at some point.
Yeah, well, I think. Go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say, I've seen. I talked to an organization that was using BeyondTrust and using its ability to allow certain privilege operations be done by an end user, and they can decide, what's in that matrix, so they don't have to have users with admin on their laptop just because they need permissions to change the network settings.
Right.
The trick is making sure you get the right mixture. You don't give them too many keys to the kingdom, because then they might as well have admin. But still, it really reduced the risk quite a bit, because they could focus in on a set of core needs and take admin away.
Sorry, Adrian, I was giving you a chance to chime in while I was sipping my coffee.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, hopefully we've made some progress on not needing, folks not needing admin access. The old excuse used to be to add printers.
Right.
Then like who's printing anymore? And everybody's at home, so maybe they're printing at home. But
yeah, I mean, it's not like there's vulnerabilities in the printer.
Right.
Never mind.
But there are other ways that admin credentials can get into systems and get cached in, and those credentials can get cached. They can get grabbed by Mimikatz.
Right.
Things like that.
Also, so a pretty fairly solvable problem, although it takes different shapes and forms. But there's group policy that can help with that. Yeah, but it has other ramifications. I mean, that's why a lot of these attacks are still valid, because the remediations have other. Look at Print Nightmare. We talked about that at length on Paul Security Weekly. How if you disable it in SMB as well, right? All these changes have different effects.
I think one of the reasons that Mimikatz is so useful, it still all goes back to AD. Like, we've got all these really complex processes, maybe automated processes that are hitting systems, installing software, stuff like that, service accounts. And those are the kinds of credentials that attackers are going to find in that host and be able to use to laterally move. Even now we're using LAPs. We don't have the same local admin passwords. The users and admin, maybe even admins aren't logging in directly to it. Like, there's still more work to do there. And, I think a lot of it just goes back to how, on a lot of Windows networks that are still AD based, everything's so tightly wound together that like there's always something else we've missed, golden tickets and Kerber roasting, and like there's always some more attack surface to find there. It's such a beast.
Adrian, I want to talk about Elastic joining forces with Command. Was this an acquisition or a partnership? It was. Okay.
Acquisition, yeah. So they had an acquisition last week. I don't have it pulled up. It was interesting name of the company, Build dot something. You remember that one?
Yes, I think we talked about that. Did we?
Yes, we did. And somehow we missed the Command one. Either they didn't announce it all at once, and I think that's it. Is they maybe did them together, but announced them separately, and. It looks like they announced Command getting acquired a little bit later. And Command is really cool. It's kind of like, like a Linux EDR, sort of.
Yeah.
Like a Linux visibility tool. Very cool tool. I've played around with it a little bit.
Does it give you patch? Does it give you patch level information as well, or just more like an EDR in terms of like behavior and configuration and?
Kind of like, so Jump Cloud was actually like this before they pivoted into like a, kind of a SMB AD competitor, more of a directory service, more of a EMM service. But you can run commands across hosts. You can do some automation and orchestration. You get that patch level visibility back. Sure. I don't think it actually does any patching. But you can get very low level visibility into what's going on all your Linux systems. And from day one, they had kind of like almost a SOAR like rule building ability.
Yep. I see that on their website. Yeah.
Yeah, you could even say like if you see this on the Linux host, we know what that problem is. Just restart the service; it fixes it every time. So IT use cases as well as security use cases.
See, I like those solutions to also include patching on Linux. Adrian and I have had those discussions, especially recently. You'll see in the open source one, we wrote up a project called Vuls.io, VULS .io. And that was one of the things I wrote in the review. I'm like, it's really cool to get that accurate report of like what's vulnerable on the system because it's credentialed scanner basically. But I want to just be able to go update it from the same console, right? Like why do I need another tool to go do that? I mean, I'm knocking that's an open source project, obviously, right? They've got to be mindful of their time and features and things of that nature. But certainly on the commercial side, Qualys will do that. But that's interesting kind of integration between your detection and monitoring and your patching systems. We've seen some of that integration and collapse of those features. I like to see more of it.
And zooming out a bit, I constantly have to remind myself that Elastic also has Endgame. They acquired Endgame. So they've already got some EDR, XDR capabilities. So this is just I don't know if it was Windows only, if Endgame had something on Linux, but I've heard from a lot of people.
I think they did support
I've heard a lot
Linux,
of people that Linux EDR solutions were not on par with the Windows side of things.
Yeah, we heard that from what was his name? Patrick Wardle. On Paul Security Weekly last week, talking about antivirus and anti-malware solutions. Yeah, that were like, hey, we got it on Windows, and we just kind of made a half-ass attempt to put it on so we could just say we supported the platform, but didn't really dig into all the stuff that Patrick digs into in terms of what are we actually looking for on macOS, because it's completely different, obviously, than Windows.
Yeah.
So Elastic's putting together
from Linux. Yeah.
They're putting together a team.
It's good. It's good stuff.
Exciting stuff.
Let's see, ThycoticCentrify, which still just sounds weird when I say it.
I wish they had. I wish they'd just gone with a
new name. Yeah, they say the latest version of their Secrets Manager Vault is a DevOps focused release. It sounds like they're playing catch up with Conjure from CyberArk. That was an acquisition by CyberArk. That had the Secrets Vault that was very heavily DevOps based. They had the Thycotic DevOps. It's tough to tell whether Thycotic DevOps Secrets Vault was an existing product with Thycotic or not, or whether they did some integrations with Centrify and kind of rolled it out as a new product. But it is a DevOps-centric Secrets Vault, which everyone needs, but no one really wants to implement because it's kind of a pain in the butt. And I don't blame you. On either side, you should have it, but it's not often straightforward.
Yeah, there's some neat features. You got some new types of secrets you can use for getting your secrets.
That's exactly it, right? Certificates, SSL-based certificates, right, to authenticate to get your secrets.
Which is kind of a note.
Because then how do you manage the secrets with your SSL?
Well, right, like you don't want the secrets to your secrets vault to get compromised. So, what are you storing those in plain text? How do you?
Yep.
I think it's interesting that you can have it set TTLs on your certificates and the like, because we've talked about you really need to rotate your host keys on for SSH, but how about rotating the user key sometimes? Because hello.
Yeah, they're DevOps shops. I've talked to people who say, we rotate our passwords hourly. In our production environment, passwords have a 1 hour TTL. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, what?
I mean, I can see that the API keys, certainly, but that also depends on whether it's an internal or external API, because you need credentials to get a new secret into the vault, right? That's where it gets really tricky.
Well, when you've got infrastructure as code and everything's automated and there's no no need for admin access into the production environment, you can start doing some really crazy stuff, like changing passwords once a minute, or you can. I think it's a way of thinking that hasn't caught on with everybody yet, But the more I learn about what people are doing here, the more it makes sense to, just make your environment really tough for anybody to get into and to be able to move around.
Yeah, containers being ephemeral, I like the strategy of you're just always rotating your containers. So if someone did get access to a container, maybe you just kind of rebuild that every hour or two, and that's the only window an attacker would have if they got shell in a container, and then it goes away. Unless they... What's that?
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the interesting things is this feels a little like, I don't remember, if you remember, but I remember the bad old days before we had firewalls and we were making sure every host and service was hardened. Now, let's not talk about whether it was hardened enough, but we were taking steps to make sure you couldn't just jump in anywhere, that there was at least some level of protection. Now, with this kind of automation, you can raise the bar. I think that's an interesting model, particularly with, more and more exposed services now.
You remind me back in the day when we used to run websites off of a CD-ROM, so it couldn't be defaced.
Yeah.
Read only.
If somebody messed with it, you rebooted.
That's it.
Yeah. It was just reminding me of Doctor Strange when they're in the mirror dimension, and they're like, making a hole under somebody else's feet. Like things are constantly moving and changing. Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of where my brain goes when I read about stuff like this.
All right.
What else we got? Absolute Software they made a product announcement, but what I thought was interesting in the announcement, they have firmware embedded persistence capabilities. They claim in more than 500 million endpoints. So Absolute's sitting in the firmware to apply protections. It makes me think of that prolific moment, and there's many with Ed Scotus, where he said, if you're susceptible to rootkits, the way to deal with that is to have a rootkit installed so it can learn and observe and protect against other malicious rootkits. This kind of seemed like the same thing for me, is that this software is in the firmware. It's good stuff in the firmware, not bad stuff inside the firmware. Enforcing policy I didn't, dig into any details or haven't done a briefing, but it sounded really interesting.
Yeah. So Absolute, man, we do not want them to get hacked.
Right?
Absolute. Like there aren't really any other vendors I'm aware of that are in the BIOS, like in the firmware for every single laptop out there. Or, it's just an option in most laptops that you can go get a license. And the old use case used to be the LoJack thing, where if somebody stole your laptop, right. You actually had a persistent bit in the firmware where even if somebody replaced a hard drive, blew away the data, reinstalled an OS, it could still beacon out, and you could retrieve that laptop and find out what happened to it, or desktop. I think this goes for desktop PCs as well, and so they're kind of in this unique position to be able to offer what is kind of like MDM, but at the firmware hardware level.
Right. That's a good way of thinking of it. At least it makes sense to me. I'm not sure how else they would pitch that, but
yeah, I mean, the use cases are all very similar to MDM use cases. Like hardware characteristics. Is the battery dying? What Wi-Fi networks are they connected to? That kind of stuff. I mean, to the point to where I don't know why you would need to do it at that level.
Interesting.
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe this is just building off that, in case it gets stolen scenario. Because generally, most companies should have some kind of MDM software that's doing exactly what this is doing. But maybe that's what it is. Maybe they're getting into the MDM space. They're saying initially it's only available for Windows. So, maybe this is paired with an agent that they're running on the host, and and that's what they're going after.
Adrian, I also wanted to get your take on Checkpoint Software acquiring Avanan. Avanan? Is that how you say that? Avanan? The fastest growing cloud email and collaboration security company. Redefine security for cloud email.
Avanan is I don't know. I don't know how to say it.
Avanan.
Something like that. Go ahead, Lee. I want your take on it too.
So I actually think there's a legit need to have good security on your cloud-based email, whether you're getting it from the provider or not.
Hey, Lee, sorry, you sound like a Cylon.
That work any better?
Try unplugging it and plugging it back in. Did you turn it off and then on again?
Speaking of troubleshooting,
right?
Tech support.
Yeah. I feel like a minute show.
Yeah, you sound like all crack. We call it the Cylon effect.
You sound like Leia when she had the mask on and she was saving Luke.
Yes, that too. Good analogy. You made fun of us for making movie analogies, and look at you. You made two. You made two in the past 8 minutes.
I just chose to embrace it.
If you can't beat them, join them.
Exactly.
Let's see if Lee's got the.
Let's see if that's any better.
There you go. Now he's back.
Better.
So you were saying, Lee, about cloud-based email security.
So what I'm concerned about is I see so many folks adopting cloud-based email, but not necessarily having security practices on them. And whether you get it from the provider or somebody else is an interesting conversation. It's like, do you trust Microsoft to watch Microsoft email, or do you trust something from Checkpoint? Or, replace Microsoft with whoever. It doesn't matter.
Right. Microsoft's the big culprit. Yeah, Patrick Gray did a great interview with, I think, someone from Proofpoint, and they were really harping on the fact that Microsoft makes all this software, and it has security vulnerabilities, but they also claim to be the largest security company in the world, and they make software to fix and monitor those vulnerabilities as well. It's kind of ironic.
Yeah. I mean, conflict of interest?
Yeah.
Well, my first comment though is if you've got something that provides you security, even if we've got the Microsoft on Microsoft thing, would you make sure it's turned on?
Yeah.
Then we can have a conversation about whether you need a better tool. But at least turn on what you got, please.
Agreed. And that gets harder, and it gets into Microsoft's licensing, which I don't pretend to understand, and their product suite, which I don't pretend to understand. And I always defer to experts in that area. And even when the experts speak, they're like, once you have it figured out, Microsoft changes it and renames it and relicenses it and all that stuff.
Yeah. So I think most email companies are not really like email security. There's not a ton that just do email anymore. Because such a big piece of email security is looking at the files that are getting sent around and traded around, and then so much of the email chatter has moved to Teams and Slack, systems like that. This company, Avanan, does cover all those bases, like file sync and share applications like Dropbox, Enterprise Dropbox Box, G Suite, Office 365, Slack, Teams. And you really have to, because the line is completely blurred between all of those now. Like honestly, when I'm using the actual Word application on a Windows system, and I share that with somebody else to collaborate on it, you used to have to go into like the web browser version of Office 365 to do that, but you can now do it straight from the Office apps. With PowerPoint or Word or anything like that. I don't even know how that's working. Like, I don't even know where that's reaching out to anymore. I've not looked into it.
It's rather involved, and in fact, some sharing scenarios in Microsoft actually create guest accounts in your tenant that are authenticated externally based on user action from the guest.
What?
And yeah, it's weird. And by the way, they also have federation too, where you say, I'm going to trust this other tenant's users. And I don't know. I don't know it well enough. I have to have the security team over there walk me through it to make sure it makes sense. And Well, it's this new world we're in, right? We're collaborating like crazy, sharing files like crazy all around the internet. And of course, my sharing solution is better than your sharing solution because I picked first, so you have to use my stuff, right?
Well, as long as you're following the Prime Directive, your federation should work just fine.
I'm just make sure I don't cross the streams first.
Oh boy. LogPoint acquires SecBI to add SOAR and XDR. So the quote is, in this, you can check all your most of your boxes on your acronym bingo if you're following along at home. LogPoint is a provider of security information event management, or SIM platform, and user behavior analytics tool. So we could say UEBA. Today revealed it has acquired SecBI, a provider of an integrated security orchestration and automation response platform, or SOAR, and extended detection and response, or XDR platform. We got the main acronyms all covered in there. I don't know what it means, but we got lots of popular acronyms.
I admit
it's got acronyms we don't know. It must be good.
No, we. What acronyms do we not know in there?
Yeah, because you got to add SOAR to your XDR to supplement your SIM with UEBA.
Well, I mean, the SOAR is your R in XDR, right? Like that's part of it.
It's a, what is that?
Right.
A name collision in your acronyms?
No,
I mean, forgot
it's not a
pane of glass.
It's
a collaboration.
It's very
not
important.
A collision.
The R is important. It's in there twice.
Yeah.
But yeah, that screenshot just looks like every other screenshot, like the dashboard there.
If you've seen one dashboard, you've seen them all.
Yeah, it's just like, they go to the data science store and they ask for some visualizations and just say, give me one of everything.
Yeah.
And that's what literally that dashboard looks like, a textbook on different visualization types. There's a map, there's a, like a
pie chart, or
I don't know the right term for it. There's a bubble chart.
The ring. What's the ring? Is that a ring? Is that a ring?
There's a tree map.
Yep.
There's a what do you call the one that looks like a spider's web? I don't know the name for that.
A matrix line graph.
The one in the lower left.
Yeah, the lower left.
Spider graph.
Oh.
There are names for all these, but it's I'm not the biggest fan of dashboards, but it's just there's only so much you can tell from it.
Well, the other thing is, who is this dashboard aimed at? I mean, you've got the dial in the middle that's really more management oriented, and some of those high level numbers and charts. Then you've got these outbound connection types that are deep dive, which would be more for your analyst than a manager. I'm kind of.
It's aimed at people with large budgets that are easily impressed.
And large screens. I think if ExtraHop, they're a sponsor, of course, but they've got a really slick interface, and they use the graphing correctly to say this host on these ports has connected to these other hosts on these ports, and presented that very well. Yeah. The other time a dashboard's made sense for me was when I was at Tenable, and the one that resonated the most was you're running scans against all your systems, people are patching your systems or not, and here are some graphs to tell you how you're doing on versus how many vulnerabilities you have and what you're patching, and not just like a snapshot, but over time. Like obviously Patch Tuesday you're going to have a lot of vulnerabilities, but what's the rate at which that falls, right? And how good are you doing on your patching and keeping up with it?
Yeah, it's a good point. Like, you can absolutely, I'm giving them a hard time about, because they did go with the dashboard that's one of everything.
Right.
But visualizations can be incredibly important. There's some things that, you can only see zoomed out with a visualization that you just can't see when you're looking at, individual events and alerts and things like that.
Yeah. And usually the ones that come with, you need to customize, and then your mileage can vary. Did you know OpenVAS had the ability to create custom dashboards in the open source version? I called that out in my review.
Do I hear scope creep in your project?
Yeah, I didn't fully, test all of the features. We'll come back to it, but I thought that was pretty cool that a lot of these, commercial companies include that as functionality, but it's also an open source too. It's pretty awesome. Adrian, you're frozen. Are you still there? Your video's frozen.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was like, wow, Adrian's really still. He's practicing some deep breathing meditation exercises.
There's some weird stuff going on with, I think it might be my USB hub that I'm using here. Something like that. But my screens all went away and came back. I think I probably need to reboot sometime today. My mouse is gone.
Did you turn it off and then on again?
I think my problems migrated east, Adrian.
Yeah.
Paul's next.
Yeah.
I'm next.
So fortunately he's in the studio. But all kidding aside, really, there looks like they have individually very useful statistics in here that would be worth drilling down on. It's just they did not choose wisely on a dashboard. I'd hate to see an analyst that has to have multiple 40-inch monitors just to see their SOC tools effectively.
Oh, no.
That just great.
Analysts need the multi 40-inch monitors. Just throwing that out there for all of our analyst friends listening. we all need that. Yeah. Right? Whether we use it or not, buy them the nice monitors, please. It does help, right? But the hard part for vendors, and when I was at Tenable, right, this was a debate. And it is for, I think, all vendors out there that have some kind of dashboarding. Like, what do you include by default? Like, out of the box, once I get it set up, what's there? And then how do I allow customization? And how much do I include by default versus how much do I allow the user to customize? You notice in some solutions, maybe you get one dashboard or it's blank, and it's up to the user to create it. And that can be kind of daunting. In terms of time to value, right? It can be a misconception of time to value. But also, if you include too many default dashboards, only a small percentage of them are ones you'll actually use, and that can also hinder your time to value. So it's very much a balancing act.
Yeah, I had a briefing with a vendor yesterday, and they had the MITRE ATT&CK framework kind of built into, and it looks like they do here, looking at this one.
Right.
Looks like they
it's a safe play.
So if you've looked at the visual MITRE ATT&CK framework, part of it dives down really deep. It looks like an iceberg, basically, with a flat top on it. Where the in like the second and third column, it goes like 50 down. And on the UI, like you just had to do tons of scrolling and zooming and panning. Like it was I was joking with them, like, what size monitor do you recommend for this?
Right. Yeah. Oh, boy. Bigger the better. Okay. 49-inch curved. 2 of them. Any other stories we want to cover before we close out the show?
I'm good.
Let's see. So IronNet is going public. Through what looks like a SPAC.
See, I thought that was old news. Maybe not.
Well, I think they were acquired. So yes, that they were acquired by a SPAC is old news. But they just started trading a couple days ago as IRNT on the New York Stock Exchange.
Oh, interesting. Oh. So the SPAC didn't have a ticker, or they changed the ticker once they made the acquisition?
Well, usually the announcement of the acquisition comes long before it's closed.
Yeah.
So that acquisition has to end, CFO topic on like what happens between the announcement and the agreement, and
it's like
actually getting it closed.
A whole different podcast. And I'm not saying an episode, but like a totally different podcast to explain that.
I just imagine people in suits sitting around a table with like large stacks of paper, signing things. I don't know.
With the suspenders and the green kind of brim. Yeah, that's what I think of.
But yeah, I assume that it couldn't happen until the acquisition closed, which sometimes takes a couple of weeks, sometimes takes a couple of months. Looking at them, but yeah, they are now the latest public cybersecurity company, and maybe a candidate to go into Matt's, collection. Matt's what do you call it?
What does he call that? Security money. Security money.
Yeah.
Yeah. It looks like they're doing all right. It looks like they wound up last Thursday they ended up around $10 a share, and now they're up to about 13.5. So they're up about 30%. I mean, what the hell? They had some serious spikes on Friday, but I think it looks like it's calmed down. So good for them.
Cybersecurity is like the money is, people don't like talking about bubbles because it's clear it's going to keep growing before anything else happens. But yeah, VC in general is just nuts. Like just talking about acquisitions. I have the numbers here. Let's see. In June 2021, 37 acquisitions. July, 38. And this past month, August, 42 deals.
Whoa.
Yeah. 42 just last month. 42 acquisitions. So yeah, a lot of movement, a lot of money.
Outstanding. Adrian and Lee, thank you for your help with Enterprise Security Weekly this week. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. See you next time.